There was a tragic mass shooting on June 17th at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. There, a 21-year-old Dylan Storm Roof shot and killed 9 people, including the Reverend and South Carolina State Senator Clementa C. Pinckney. At the time of this recording, it's Thursday, June 18th, and we just learned before we started recording that Dylan Storm Roof has just been caught by law enforcement in North Carolina. We don't really know that much about him. I mean, they've tried to find his old high school classmates and some other acquaintances and other people, but, we really don't have very many facts about him. What we do know is that, and pretty much, what we do know is what we've learned about him on his Facebook page and, and some of the things that his acquaintances have said. But none of this has really stopped, big media from pumping that same old story about mental illness being at the cause of this act of terrorism. And yes, it's terrorism. Here's what bothers me about mental illness in the way that it's been covered so far. First, there's a lot of speculative diagnosing while this murderer was out on the loose. And, the fact that there were no solid facts about Dylan Storm Roof's actual mental health does not matter. And that's a problem because it perpetuates this myth of mentally ill monsters out there lurking and, ready to strike. And the reason why I have a problem with this is that it perpetuates the stigmatizing myth. And on this show, we've covered the fact that millions of Americans suffer from some kind of mental illness, some minor, some major, and there's a lot in between. And when the public dialogue dives into this, speculation about mental illness and all of this myth making, it seems like, first off, this is the only time that we talk about mental illness. And then the time that we do talk about it, we're turning this person into a monster. Now, he's very much a murderer. Now, but whether he's this, mentally ill monster is yet to actually be proven. And the problem with monsterifying mental illness is that it continues to perpetuate the stigma for people who actually do suffer from mental illness. And we know the facts are that people who suffer from mental illness have very little to do with violence in this country. Only about 4% of violent acts in this country are committed by somebody who is mentally ill. But instead, what we see from big media and from a lot of people who, want to just continue speculating on that 24/7 cable news cycle is that there is this monstrous, mentally ill, person out there. And, and that somehow that mental illness is at the core of all of this. And there are consequences to this kind of stigma. It basically continues to punish people who might eventually want to someday raise their hand and ask for help. Because after all, when you ask for help, do you want to risk being identified as a dangerous monster? That is the danger of doing, so much, speculative diagnosing before you even apprehended, the murderer. Now, let's say, in the next 24 hours, we actually do learn, from law enforcement and from investigators that Dylan Storm Roof actually does have some previously undiagnosed mental illness. It doesn't change the fact that we were stigmatizing illness as this monster out there, rather than humanizing it. Now, that's not to say that I have any sympathy whatsoever for the actions of Dylan Storm Roof. I obviously condemn what he has done. It's a terrible, terrible thing. It's just that we don't really need to take the terrible thing that he did and then use it as an opportunity to once again punish the mentally ill. There is a way to talk about a lot of this without conflating the two. And the sad truth is that, let's say if Dylan Storm Roof has a mental illness, what we really need to be talking about in this country is that why did he have gun rights before he had health rights? Why is it that it was easier for him to get access to a gun before it was easier for him to get access to mental health care? What we really need to be doing in this country is be asking those parts of the country, like South Carolina, we need to be asking governors like Nikki Haley why they are doing everything they can to make it easier for people to get guns and making it harder for them to get health care, especially mental health care. Because, this morning, Governor, Haley has tears in her eyes and she's at a news conference, and she actually said, "We woke up today and the heart and soul of South Carolina was broken. Parents are having to explain to their kids how they can go to church and feel safe." Governor, there are millions of parents and kids and thousands of doctors in America who want to know how and why you and your legislature continue to fight for gun rights and stop health rights. Because to me, that is one of the central issues of this tragedy, is that we seem to keep prioritizing gun rights as if that's a thing, that we keep prioritizing gun rights over health rights. And to me, the real illness that we need to be talking about right now is America's addiction to guns. There's no getting around this conversation, but we seem to. There's a lot of people out there saying that they have, that they're praying for Charleston families right now. And I am too. And I don't mean to put down prayer. And I don't mean to say that it's wrong to pray for the families. And I'm definitely not saying that we shouldn't be praying for them. Absolutely, we should be praying for them. Those families are in my heart. They're in my prayers. They're in my mind. And maybe actually, we should be looking at prayer a little bit more closely. And in particular, I'd like to look at a prayer used by some addicts and by some Americans who are simply trying to overcome some other kind of adversity. And that's that prayer. It's really familiar. It goes, "I pray for the courage to change the things I can, the serenity to accept the things that I cannot, and the wisdom to know the difference." America needs to pray for the courage to change the things we can about gun violence in this country. We need to pray for the courage to admit that maybe owning 300 million guns is really that's too many guns. We need the courage to admit that gun rights are not real. Legal gun ownership in this country is a privilege. It's not a right. We need the courage to get real about that fact and completely rethink and rebuild how guns are owned in this country. But we don't like any of that. It involves hard work, taking responsibility, and awkward confrontations. So America might pray for courage, but they don't really want to use it. Instead, America is going to pray for serenity, to accept the things that we cannot change, because that sounds an awful lot like complacency. That's what I hear whenever I hear these calls for calm. Because when you're calm, you're not urgent. And when you lack urgency, you won't do all that hard work to stop gun violence. And the other thing about praying for serenity is that it sounds noble. Condolences are offered, and these myths of the mentally ill monsters, they get to be used as excuses. They get to be used as scapegoats from confronting what really needs to change in this country. Serenity means that you don't have to ask all the tough questions about why we have gun rights, but not health rights. And let me tell you, the thing about serenity is that at a time like this, it is complacency. And I get it, because the thing is that right now, rather than having to, actually confront the things that must be changed, it's easier to just say we need to accept the things that we cannot change. That complacency, that whole thing of not having to take responsibility for any of it. I get it. It's comfortable. It's convenient. But it's also cowardly. Sadly, America is going to lose itself in the serenity, and it won't pray for the last part of that prayer. The wisdom to know the difference between changing what you can and accepting what you can't. America won't pray for that wisdom, but that doesn't mean it's not there. In 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. eulogized the girls who were killed by a bombing of a church in Birmingham. And he said those girls, quote, "say to each of us, black and white alike, that we must substitute courage for caution, They say to us that we must be concerned not merely about who murdered them, but about the system, the way of life, the philosophy which produced the murderers. Their death says to us that we must work passionately and unrelentingly for the realization of the American dream." Unquote. Dr. King's wisdom is exactly the blessing we need right now. We need to fight for and find the courage to make it a reality in America for each of us to have health rights before any gun rights. I pray for justice, for an America free of gun violence. I pray for justice born out of courage and wisdom, because without justice, there is no peace, there is no serenity for any of us. And we need to stop kidding ourselves that, that guns are not a problem in this country, that what we really need to do is to keep finding these quote-unquote lone mentally ill gunmen, these lone disturbed individuals. Because the truth of the matter is that the longer that we keep trying to use mental illness as a scapegoat, the longer we're going to have to keep dealing with tragedies like this one. Whether it's Charleston, South Carolina, or Oak Creek, Wisconsin. The last time there was a mass shooter going after and attacking a house of worship was not even in 1963. It was in 2012 when a quote-unquote lone disturbed gunman shot and killed people at worship and at public service at a gurdwara in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. We seem to have forgotten those lives because they were brown, they were turbaned, and they may not be what we thought of as American. I know that we can't forget these lives that we've lost in Charleston. We can't forget the lives that we lost in we can't forget the lives that we lost in Newtown, Connecticut. We can't forget the lives that we lost in Aurora, Colorado. We can't forget the lives that we have lost in Ferguson, Missouri, in Cleveland, Ohio, in Long Island, New York. None of these lives can be forgotten, and none of these lives can be written off as any of the cheap excuses that we keep seeming to hear, that, oh, it was a lone gunman. Oh, it was one bad apple of a cop. Maybe it's the fact that we've got too many guns in this country, we've got too much prejudice, and when the two get together, lives are being lost. Maybe we need to actually start getting real with ourselves. And when we're done praying for the courage and we're done praying for the wisdom to change the things that we can, we need to put prayer into action. It is high time that every state in this country accepted the fact that gun violence is killing, one of us every day. There are 30,000 Americans dying every year because we seem to be in denial about the threat that guns are to our public health. It's high time that every state in this country, that our Congress, that the Senate, the House, that all of us took responsibility for preventing any more people from dying unnecessarily. This is preventable. This is on us. This is, the whole thing about, praying for courage and praying for wisdom is that at some point we need to turn and look at each other and realize we are the answer to each other's prayers. We are the ones that have been delivered to help each other at this time and to turn health rights into a reality and gun rights into the myth that it is. This is tough talk. It's tough talk at a tough time. A lot of people are going to say now is not the time to be talking about, about gun control, about gun safety, because they want to try and mask over the real issue in order to appear noble in consoling these families. Meanwhile, we have really only just condemned some future life to a death that could be totally prevented right now if we took the time to get real. Gun violence is a public health threat. It is not some act of God. It is not some, cruel, anomaly of nature out there that we have no control over. We can fix this. We must fix this. We must do better for each other as Americans. Because honestly, I'm not going to, I don't want to live in an America where we keep tolerating one more church, one more school, one more place of worship, one more shopping center, one more movie theater as an acceptable place for gun violence to happen. That, oh well, that's the best that we've got? Seriously? We're Americans. We can do better than this. We must do better than this. I implore you to seek action in all of this right now, because quite frankly, this is not the kind of thing that really can be, prayed away. I believe in prayer for these families. They deserve, our love, our outreach. They deserve our hugs, our tears, our comforting shoulders. They deserve all of that. But at the end of the day, they also need to know that we're going to put our minds to work on this, and they need to know that we're going to put the strength of our back into this, that we're going to find the backbone, and not just the wishbone, but the backbone, to actually make gun violence a thing of the past, to actually turn it into something that we can talk about as maybe, yes, a shameful chapter in our country's history, but a shameful chapter that came to a rightful end because we summoned the will to get real. It's high time that, that we get absolutely and totally real about gun violence in this country. It's a shameful thing that any of these Americans had to die. It's a shameful thing that, that somebody like Dylan has gun rights but not health rights. But from that shame, I think that we can recover. I am an optimist in all of this. As angry as I am, I will not stop being optimistic that we can turn things around for gun violence. But I don't believe in just having a pie-in-the-sky form of optimism. I believe in that we need to shake some people up, shake them into action, that this needs to be turned into a real call for real people to approach their leaders with real solutions. Nobody has to lose their gun unnecessarily. It's just that we need to start getting real about legal gun ownership being a privilege and not a right. And in the meantime, our health is a right. And that needs to be, and all of those things are within our reach. We can build this together. But the longer that we keep pumping these myths, the longer that we keep having empty prayers, the more that we can look forward to more of our fellow Americans unnecessarily losing their life to this. I implore you to write your member of Congress, to write your governor, write your state legislature, to really let them know that you believe that gun rights are not that guns are not a right, that they are a privilege, and that health is not a privilege, it's a basic human right. We can and will turn this around. You've been listening to Dr. America on the We Act Radio Network. I am your host, Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, and until next time, salud to your health.